We've been talking over about the past month or so and emphasizing the aspect of the Bible that we would say is a story. The Bible is, among other things, a storybook. It's a true storybook. And there are many, many stories within the Bible, but at the same time, the Bible is one long story that extends all the way back from the beginning of time all the way into eternity future. It's God's story that He wrote, and now it's playing out throughout history. And it's such a comfort to me, because whenever I see something on the news that disturbs me, well, I just remember that God is in charge. Amen? And so the Bible is indeed a story, and the book of Genesis, that story begins. I wonder how many of us ever get the idea that we've come to understand God. If you think that you've come to understand God, then that's just probably a really good indication that you have not. Now, I've been studying God's Word and teaching it for many decades, and I haven't even scratched the surface. So no, we are not able to understand. And as a matter of fact, the Bible does not explain to us all aspects of God, His purposes and His ways. It couldn't. I don't think that any work of paper and ink could ever do that. And there's definitely no way that we would ever be able to grasp it. If there was a book that did that, it would probably be bigger than the entire earth in small print. So that is not really the purpose of this Bible. The purpose of this Bible is the fact that God has a story. And it is a story that reveals Himself to us. It is a story that tells the history and the future of the universe. And it is a story that helps us to understand how our own individual chapters fit in with it. If I understand that all of history is a story, then whenever I start to try to consider my chapter and to wonder what my chapter is all about, what my life is supposed to be all about, if I can grasp the fact that it's just the teeny tiniest portion, a little bit of God's story, as long as I can keep that in the back of my mind, then I think that I come a little closer to understanding what it is. It's when we get to thinking that our lives are magnanimous in their importance that we misunderstand what God has for us. So, I'm wondering, since the Bible is a storybook, I'm wondering what it's saying about Christians that most of them have never read the entire Bible. I was going to ask for a show of hands who has read it all, but I decided not to do that. I don't want anybody to feel embarrassed this morning, but the truth of the matter is the majority of Christians in this country have not read the entire Bible. And so I'm wondering what that says about us when this is kind of like, it's not our source of life, but it is representation of life to us. It is life to us in the sense that it is through this that we discover the love of God. It is through this that we discover the way that God reached down to us with that reckless love of His and died for us so that we could be redeemed. But if you've never read it through, you probably don't have a very good grasp of the fact that this is one long story going all the way through it. And so part of my job, I think, is to help you to have a framework of how this thing is put together. You know, I put a lot of pressure on myself to try to make the sermons I preach relevant. That I try to communicate things from God's Word that are important for you to know and how to navigate this life. And there's, that's very, very important. If I'm not doing my job if I don't do that. But sometimes people get so hung up on the application that they forget that there's something in knowing the story itself that is extremely important for us. To know the framework will really enable us to better understand, well, all of it. Now, for those of you who have read your Bible all the way through, you know that in the Old Testament there are some really weird things, right? I mean, there's some doozies in the Old Testament that just make us go, what? That's why one reason why I recommend to new Christians that they read the New Testament first. Because if you know where the story is going, then some of those really odd things in the Old Testament, well, I don't know if they make any more sense or not, but they do at least keep us from getting into too big of a tizzy when we read those. And when we get to those, we've just got to understand that was a really long time ago. Writing was different. People thought different. And, you know, not everything in the Bible is something that God said. The Bible records the words of the devil. It records the words of people, good and evil. It records the words of angels, even one time a donkey that talked, that God used in a strange way. So, yes, there are weird things in the Old Testament, but if you kind of understand where things are going, it helps. So, in our looking then at the Old Testament, the obvious thing for us then is to say, well, how does this story begin? Over the Easter season, we did a lot of talk about the story of Jesus last week, his triumphal entry, his death on the cross, his resurrection, and so forth. But I think it's good for us to go back and to see how the story begins. And so I'm starting this today. It's going to last around 10 weeks. And it's just going to be highlights from the book of Genesis, the book of the beginnings. You know, since Genesis is the book of beginnings, it's not by accident that it's also the first book of the Bible, right? Because if it were any place else, that would be confusing, right? So, with 50 chapters in the book of Genesis and me only taking 10 weeks, that's going to be definitely some highlights from it. And there's going to be a lot of things. But I'd like to challenge you over the next 10 weeks to read the entire book of Genesis on your own. Now, you should be able to do that in 10 weeks. That's 70 days, 50 chapters. You don't even have to read a chapter a day to be able to get that done. So I'd like to encourage you to do so as we go through this story of the beginning. How does it begin? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, I've heard that this verse was also a proof text for the scripturality of baseball. In the big inning. Thank you, Larry. I appreciate that. I knew at least one person would laugh at that. Didn't know for sure who it'd be, but I appreciate that a lot. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, as I read through this, I think that probably those 10 words are the most read words that have ever been written. Because a lot of people have set out to read the Bible. You know, a lot of people who are not believers or not even Christians have set out to read the Bible. And so the obvious place that you would start if you decide to read the Bible is what? At the beginning. And so the very first verse of it, we've all read these words. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And for the past 150 years, these have probably been the most controversial 10 words that have ever been written. And why do I say that? Because in the year 1859, Thursday night small group, what happened in 1859? Come on, Thursday night small group. Something happened in 1859 from the videos. No. Nope, that was earlier a little bit. It was the year, right, it was the year that Darwin published The Origin of Species by Natural Selection. Now, Darwin did not invent evolution. It was around before him, but he was the one who made it palatable to a lot of people. Now, the thing about Darwin is that he did not decide to believe in evolution because of the observations he made. Everybody thinks that he went on the ship, the Beagle, and went to all those islands, and he observed things, and that he, as a result of his observation, that he came to the conclusion that evolution had happened. But that's not true at all. The reason he came to that conclusion is because his daughter died and he was so upset about it, and he could not understand why God would do something like that. And so rather than try to understand that or to trust God, he chose to just believe that there was no God. And if there is no God, there has to be a way that this universe came into existence. Now, I'm sorry if this is offensive, but there's just never, ever been any explanation whatsoever that comes close to how something could have arisen from nothing without a cause. That just couldn't happen. Now, there are a few evolutionists out there that believe that the universe has always existed, but they're very few in number. Most evolutionary scientists don't think that could have happened. They believe that it had to have had an origin, because if it had always existed, if it was going by the same laws right now, it would have ceased to exist already. So it had to have a beginning, and it's got to be either creation by a designer or some kind of freak accident that caused the universe to materialize out of absolutely nothing. I think we talked last week about Stephen Hawking and how he said that as long as there's such a thing as a law of gravity, then the universe doesn't need God as a reason for its existence. What this brilliant, and he was a brilliant physicist, but what he failed to consider was the fact that without anything there is no gravity and there's no law of gravity, because you have to have mass and you have to have energy for gravity to take place. So you know, even brilliant scientists can say dumb things sometimes.
He knows now.
Yes, he does, because he passed away recently. So he does know now. So this is not going to be, even today's message is not going to be so much about apologetics. In other words, the defense of the idea of creation, as it is going to be the beginning of the story. But I do want to just look at a couple of things, because as we go through this, we also need to see just how important Genesis is. Genesis is important because it does explain our origins. And what you believe about our origins will determine the entire course of your life. Did you know that? What you believe about our origins determines the entire course, the whole direction of your life. I'll explain that a little bit more at the end, how that works. But that's really important. Now, some people would come along and they'd say, well, when all the credible scientists in the world believe in evolution, how could they all be wrong? I'd say that's a fair question. I would also say that it is a myth that all of the credible scientists in the world believe in evolution. That's just not true. There are thousands upon thousands of scientists who recognize that evolution was an impossibility. And a lot of them are not believers. A lot of them are not Christians. But they have just looked objectively at the evidence enough to realize that it could not have happened. And so that's a myth that all the credible scientists in the world believe that way. But if that's still a lingering question, I mean, there are a lot. I would say probably the majority of the degreed scientists in the world probably do agree that evolution happened. So how could that even be if there wasn't anything to it? Well, it's really not hard to understand. If you believe the Bible, we learn from the Bible that Satan is real. Satan, God's enemy, is alive and active on this planet, and that he has control of the world system. Even Jesus himself referred to Satan as the ruler of this world. Not saying that he's the ruler of this universe, or even necessarily the earth as a planet itself. He's the ruler of this world system that is present. By the way, Genesis explains how he got to be the ruler of this world, but we'll go into that just another day. So if Satan is alive, if he's real, and if he has control of the world system, then let's just think about this. Who would you say has basic control over the entertainment and media industry? Now, that's not to say that all entertainment is of Satan. There's lots of good entertainment, wholesome believing entertainment, and not all of the, I mean, there's a lot of entertainment that is not necessarily Christian, but it's okay. So that's not to say that all entertainers are under the control of Satan, but the industry as a whole is. And I think that you don't have to spend very much time watching current movies, television series, listening to popular music to know that Satan is in control of media and entertainment industry in this country. What about education? Who has control over the educational system? Let's put it this way. For example, last week the University of Tennessee sponsored Sex Week, in which they had all kinds of workshops and seminars about all different perverted kinds of sexual behavior. And I'm not going to make a list of all the things that I read about it, because you don't want to hear it. Yes, that's right. And I'm willing to bet that there probably was not one single workshop on the joys of lifelong, monogamous, faithful marriage. But there wasn't. And so that's just a tiny example. Now, if Satan, like I said earlier with the media, it's not that all people in education are under the control of Satan. There's lots of good educators. There are lots of good teachers, and they're working hard to counteract all of the bad that's going on in education. And thank God that they are there. So, is this a rundown of everyone who's in education? Absolutely not. But it's hard to argue that Satan has, as a general idea of the system, control over that. And so, basically, you don't really have any state universities that present any other viable option besides evolution. Why? Because Satan has his foothold, it's taken ground, and so it's only natural and only to be expected that students that are not believers that enter college, and that's what they're taught, and the whole idea of creation or design is constantly made fun of, and they're never presented any facts, it's only natural that most scientists would believe that way. Don't you agree? So if it bothers you, the number of, quote, experts that believe in evolution, I wouldn't let that bother me, because it's very self-explanatory as to why that would be the case. Because Satan has control. Now, not only does Genesis explain our origins, it also explains the origin of many of the things that we see going on. In his book, The Genesis Record, Henry Morris writes that Genesis reveals the origin of the universe, the origin of order and complexity, the solar system, the atmosphere and the hydrosphere, life, the human race, marriage, evil, language, government, culture, nations, religion, the chosen people, all of those things that Genesis reveals the origin of. And if you'll look down through that list, you will see that almost everything on that list is a political hot button today. Almost everything in this list has been called into question by God's enemies and is a source of something controversial. Like, for example, gay marriage, very controversial. What does the Bible tell us? It tells us that God created man male and female. The evil thing, we all know that a lot of people don't even believe there's such a thing as evil. The origin of all the nations, where did they come from? Religion. Saw a show recently on television, and it was trying to say that they had found the roots of the evolution of religion, and what they saw was they saw a bunch of gorillas throwing rocks at a tree, and they couldn't figure out why gorillas would throw rocks at a tree, and so they decided that that was the very beginning of religious superstition. Of course, what else could it be, right? What else could it be? So Genesis speaks to today's issues in a very, very strong way. So it's really, really important that we understand it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. How long did it take? Exodus tells us, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them." Now, Ken Ham is one of the foremost creationists in the country today as far as just being well known. And he says that he gets way more flack over the idea that creation happened in 6 days about 6,000 years ago than he even does with the idea of creation itself. Now, there's a reason for that. And that is that if evolution is true, it had to have billions of years. As a matter of fact, there have been some mathematicians that have kind of crossed over into biology, and they've numbered the transitions. I mean, I don't mean numbered literally, but they've made estimates of how many transitions would have had to have taken place in order for all life to have come from one single cell. And billions of years is not even close to long enough for that to have happened. Not even close. But obviously, if believing in evolution is something you feel strongly about, then this idea of creation happening in 6 days around 6,000 years ago, well, obviously that's going to be something that's going to make you angry. Now, you don't have to believe in 6 literal days of creation 6,000 years ago to be a Christian. You don't have to believe that. I do think you have to believe in creation in general, because otherwise, then, well, the whole Bible's a farce. If you don't believe in a creator, then why would you ever need to be saved? But you don't have to believe that. So if this is you, if you have questions about that, I don't condemn you for that. But at the same time, I'm not going to apologize for saying this, because this is the most true to the Word of God interpretation that there is. Now, some people say, well, just because it says 6 days, doesn't that mean that does a day always have to mean a day? I mean, after all, it doesn't say in Peter that 1,000 years is like a day to the Lord and a day like 1,000 years? Well, yes, it does, but it was not talking about that by any stretch of the imagination. You can't use that to just take all the time frames in the Bible and say they don't count. But some people would say, well, maybe that those days of creation in Genesis, maybe they just represented long eons of time. I'm not going to go into all the reasons why I don't believe that's true. There are actually scientific reasons to believe that is not true. But what I want to address here is the fact that a lot of people say, well, the language of Genesis 1 allows for that interpretation. I mean, how do we know that a day means a day? I mean, it was written a long, long time ago, right? So let me just show you this quote there that came out in an article. It says, one of the best Hebraists, and that's a Hebrew language scholar, one of the best Hebraists in the world, James Barr of Oxford University, had written in a letter 20 years ago, so far as I know, there is no professor of Hebrew or Old Testament at any world-class university who does not believe that the writer or writers of Genesis 1 through 11 intended to convey to their readers, the ideas that, these are the ideas. A, creation took place in a series of 6 days, which were the same as the days of 24 hours we now experience. And B, the figures contained in the Genesis genealogies provided by simple addition a chronology from the beginning of the world up to later stages in the biblical story. So this expert Hebrew scholar says that there are no major Hebrew scholars that think that's what the text is saying. That the text, I'm getting confusing here. There's no Hebrew scholars that think that seriously that the days of creation in Genesis 1 could actually mean millions of years and eons of time. So all the good ones, they recognize it for what it says, 6 days. And then the article goes on to say, Hugh Williamson is the current Regius Professor of Hebrew at Oxford University. Oxford is perhaps the most prestigious university in the world, and Williamson is one of the top Hebraists anywhere. In an email, he responded, so far as the days of Genesis 1 are concerned, I am sure that Professor Barr was correct. I have not met any Hebrew professors who had the slightest doubt about this unless they were already committed to some alternative by other considerations that do not arise from a straightforward reading of the Hebrew text as it stands. So the greatest and best Hebrew scholars in the world believe that the intention of Genesis 1 is to say that it was 6 days. So, since they know a whole lot more about it than I do, and since, well, I already believe that anyway, I'm just going to kind of take their word for it, and I think that we should too. But you don't have to have an expert to explain it to you. When you read in the book of Genesis, when it says the evening and the morning, or it was evening, it was morning, day one, I mean, how many other interpretations could there be of that? So, story begins.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. And the evening and the morning were the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven, to divide the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven, to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that has life, and birds that may fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of heaven." And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply in the earth." And the evening and the morning were the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth a living creature after its kind, livestock and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after its kind." And it was so. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. the evening and the morning were the sixth day.
I can tell you by experience that if you want to learn something about a builder, then just start remodeling a house that builder built. I'm doing that right now, and I can tell you that when you go to remodeling a house, then you learn, even though you might not even know who the builder was, you learn a lot about the builder. You learn whether or not that builder had high standards, or if he just was, trying to cover up his mistakes. You learned how seriously he took all kinds of issues, and sometimes you say to yourself, why did he do that? Now, I'm sure Lewis could explain that in a lot more detail and experience than I can, but I'm finding out that is something that's true. Well, let me tell you, when you leave today, and you, on your way home or this afternoon, just step outside and take a look around you and say, what does this inspection that I'm doing of this creation tell me about the work of God? Of course, there's so much to creation that we cannot even see. But when I look around at creation, I see a God of perfection. A God whose standard never lacks for any amount of quality. And that when God made this earth, when he made this universe, he made it perfect. Now, no, it's not perfect now, but that's due to something else that happened a little bit later. So when you think of the abundant variety of wildlife or plant life, when you think of the vastness of space and of the billions upon billions upon billions of stars that exist, that God created every single one of them and placed them in orbit as he wished them to be, and there they stay. What else can we think of right now that would say that about God more than just the fact that God created? In Romans, Paul tells us that the creation is a constant witness to the existence of God, and that it is strong enough of a testimony that there will be no person without excuse on the judgment day. In particular, to me, at least with Psalm 19, the writer of this psalm was, without necessarily excluding all the other aspects, was definitely thinking about the sky and the stars and space when he wrote these words. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky displays his handiwork. Day after day it speaks out. Night after night it reveals his greatness. There is no actual speech or word, nor is its voice literally heard, yet its voice echoes throughout the earth. Its words carry to the distant horizon. In the sky he has pitched a tent for the sun. Like a bridegroom it emerges from its chamber. Like a strong man it enjoys running its course. It emerges from the distant horizon and goes from one end of the sky to the other. Nothing can escape its heat. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky displays his handiwork. I'm sure I've told you before how that 1 year really early in my ministry, I was going through a crisis of belief and was actually questioning concerning whether or not I thought there was a God. And when you're already a pastor and you start questioning whether or not there's a God, that's bad. And I'm not sure how it happened, but God brought me to a study of the subject of creation versus evolution, and I got so wrapped up in it that I spent an entire summer just devouring all of the information that I could find from a variety of sources about the subject, and I became convinced that it was absolutely impossible for evolution to have taken place. And since there's only two options, evolution or creation, then that says that creation has to have happened. There has to be a God who did it. And so now, since then, when things began to make me question or just start to ask those silly little questions like, am I really sure that there's a God there? I just remember that creation is here. There has to be an explanation for it. Evolution is no solution, and therefore there has to be a God. And whenever I realize and let that speak to me, then all the other things fall into place. This is His Word. He sent His only Son, Jesus Christ, to be the punishment for my sins. And because of His grace and His death and His resurrection, I have been saved. You know, I know how much of a sinner I am. Even nowadays, after being a Christian and a pastor all these decades, I still sometimes have my eyes wide awakened to just what my life is, has been, and would be if it wasn't for God. And when that last song that we did, that I was kind of going through a fresh awakening, my eyes opening as I looked back at some of the things that's been in my past, and realizing that I don't deserve anything. As a matter of fact, the one thing that I do deserve is hell. But God, with His reckless love, with no shadow that He won't light up, no mountain He won't climb up, with no wall He won't kick down, no lie He won't tear down, and He's definitely kicked some walls down and tore down some lies in my life to come after me so that His love could save me. And in that way, I'm so thankful. Now, I said earlier that your view of your origins will determine your direction in life, because if you believe that this universe happened by accident and that there is no God, then number one, you're going to just live your life however you want, and then when you die, you're just going to die and you're going to be put 6 foot under, and that's going to be it. But if you believe that this universe has been created, then you're going to realize that you have some accountability to this Creator for the way you lived your life. You know that your life is here for a purpose, and that we are accountable to Him for that. And when you realize you're accountable, then you're going to realize how badly you have failed. And when you realize how badly you have failed, then you look to God for what He has provided, which is salvation through Jesus Christ. So you see, what you believe about origins is going to determine the entire direction of your life. And I really believe that in this day that we need to be adept, that we need to be crisp with our knowledge. I'm not going to be doing apologetics very much at all in this series, but I've probably got enough material to go for at least 3 months doing that. And it's something that you should educate yourselves on as well, because there will be no other objection to Christianity that you will encounter more often than the idea of evolution. So, let's get serious. Let's get serious about the account that God has given us. And as we begin to explore the beginnings of His story, the story that culminates at the end of this book, then let's look for ourselves in there. You know, I believe that where we are in the story is right around here. Right here at the end. Don't think we're in the middle. Don't think we're at the beginning. I think that there's just a few pages left in this story as it plays out in God's reality. So that tells me that we need to be very serious about our lives, and we need to examine them and make sure that we are, as Peter says, in the faith. Father, I thank you for allowing us to look at these things this morning. I pray, Father, that you would just enable us to